gonna tell on you.
Welcome to Making a Murderer, Rubberducky YouTube channel.
You can tell yourself and all our friends I was wrong and you were right. But your sins that happened in the dark will come out in the light. I'm not gonna waste my breath, I won't put up a fight. 'Cause the days are gonna whisper and the months are gonna talk until the years yell out the truth. Time will tell, time will tell on you. When a train whistles far away, and when the cold wind blows, when the lightning in your eyes reveals the darkness in your soul, the world will be reminded of what it already knows. 'Cause the days are gonna whisper and the months are gonna talk until the years yell out the truth. Time will tell, time will tell on you.
Hey, do you guys recognize this guy? Yeah, that's Steven Avery. He spent 18 years of his life locked behind prison bars for a crime he didn't commit. Avery was finally released on September 11th, 2003. By that time, his wife had divorced him, and he was estranged from his family. Most of his adult life was spent in prison, and now he was free to begin to live. That had to be the happiest day of Steven Avery's life. He had nothing to his name, and his name was ruined by the wrongful conviction. But Steven, he made the national news. He was definitely noticed, and he became more or less a spokesperson for those that were wrongfully convicted. Forensic evidence would prove Avery's innocence. Shortly after Avery's September 2003 prison release and exoneration, the former Wisconsin Attorney General, Peg Lautenschlager, in December of 2003, would announce that the law enforcement agencies and County of Manitowoc did not wrong Avery in the unfolding events of his 1985 conviction. Every year, the Innocence Project is flooded. About 3,000 prisoners write to the Innocence Project annually, and at any given time, the Innocence Project is evaluating 6,000 to 8,000 potential cases. Since 1998, Innocent Project's founders, Keith Finley and John Prey, only 23 wrongfully convicted individuals have been exonerated as of 2016. What would new DNA testing used by Steven Avery to exonerate him from the wrongful conviction have spurred? Was this an epidemic waiting to happen? How high was the bar being set for restitution that would be awarded to those that followed Steven Avery's example? Now, Attorney General Peg Lautenschlager concluded there were no criminal charges to be filed. In 2003, State Attorney General Peg Lautenschlager concluded no criminal charges or ethic violations should be brought against any government officials, including or involved in the investigation and prosecution of Avery. Reports said there were detectives and a victim witness officials who had doubts back in 1985 that Avery committed the crime and even suggested a more likely suspect. But the Manitowoc County Sheriff, Tom Kosurik, prosecutor D.A. Vogel were convinced otherwise. In her report, the Attorney General, Peg L., wrote that at worst, the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department failed to investigate a viable suspect in the assault of the jogger. Steven was awarded $25,000, but it took a long time to get it, and during that time, he struggled. At 42, he could barely get by. He was living in an ice shanty at times and fighting with family members. He filed a lawsuit for $1 million in lost wages. In 2005, the Avery Bill is introduced, and its key provisions of the bill include electronic recording of both juvenile and adult felony suspect interrogations. It also required written police policies governing the eyewitness identification procedures, priority DNA testing in post-conviction cases, and last but not least, new provisions for retention of evidence that contained DNA. Playing the devil's advocate, however, Marquette University law professor Daniel Blinka said, "A lot of these are good ideas, particularly when you look at the horrific breakdown of the good investigation techniques. In the Avery case, something must be done, but I think this comes down to it's heightening the training and professionalism of police and prosecutors, particularly making sure the cops understand that just because they fix their sights on one subject doesn't mean you abandon objectivity and you don't keep open minds as to the person's possible innocence." In 2001, biological retention law was introduced. Avery's exoneration is the first under Wisconsin's DNA testing statute adopted in 2001. According to the State Attorney General's office, the law requires the preservation of biological evidence as long as anyone remains in custody and provides a right to post-conviction DNA testing. 2001 Wisconsin Act 16 became law this past summer. Wisconsin law caught up for the first time, being with the rapidly evolving world of forensic DNA testing. Included in the budget bill were new forensic DNA provisions that update the definition of a DNA profile to reflect modern technology, require the state to preserve biological evidence after conviction, provide access to that biological evidence for post-conviction DNA testing that might prove innocence, and relax the statute of limitation in sexual assault cases in which the state has developed a DNA profile of the perpetrator. These legislative initiatives reflect the power of DNA evidence to change attitudes and approaches to criminal cases. They recognize the power of DNA to prove guilt or innocence. They reflect a shift in the balance between traditional notions and fairness and finality, and a new acknowledgement of exonerating the innocent and convicting only truly guilty is a paramount concern, even if it comes at the expense of some loss of finality. Enter Walt Kelly, well known in civil liberty circles, who would become half of a two-man team that Avery chose to represent him in a $36 million wrongful conviction civil action. The lawsuit was filed in 2004, and within a year, the plaintiff's legal team had Manitowoc County against the ropes. Case files and depositions clearly demonstrated gross misconduct by the former district attorney, Dennis Vogel, and retired sheriff, Thomas Kosurik, in their push to secure Avery's 1985 conviction. Avery sued sheriff and the DA of Manitowoc. Avery was obviously angry that he toiled away for nearly 2 decades for a crime he didn't commit. His wife divorced him while he was in prison. Many family members wouldn't even speak to him, and his reputation was ruined. Avery responded by filing a civil suit for $36 million against Manitowoc County, former Sheriff Thomas Kukurik, and District Attorney Dennis Vogel. But the insurance backs out. So come to find out, State Farm decides not to back Dennis Vogel or Thomas Kukurik if they are found negligent. Wherefore, State Farm respectfully asks that the court enter judgment as follows. A, declaring that its homeowner's policy does not provide coverage for this lawsuit to Thomas K. Kukurik. And you also have the same for Dennis Vogel. And that was signed on the 14th day of February 2006. Well, there's all different sides to this case. And you got to think back to how Miss Penny Bernstein felt. And she felt responsible. She said, "The day I learned of the exoneration was worse than the day I was assaulted. I really fought back when my attacker grabbed me. I scratched him, I kicked him. I did not go gently. After the DNA results came back, I just felt powerless. I can't unring this bell. I can't give Steven back the years that he lost. At the time, I didn't know anything about how memory works, about what good procedures are, about showing lineups to victims. The perpetrator was not in the photo lineup I was shown. I never had the opportunity to identify my actual assailant. It was simultaneous lineup where witnesses are shown all the photos at once. There were 9 photos. I looked carefully at each one and picked Steven Avery's. The sheriff, Tom Kukurik, personally chose to add Steven Avery to the lineup. Penny Bernstein, the rape victim in Making a Murderer, speaks out. There were 8 men, and I again picked Steven Avery. He was the only person who was in both lineups, so it's logical that I would pick him. After the exoneration, there was a lot of publicity. Steven was made out to be a hero, and I went from having sympathy to being this horrible person who made a mistake and is responsible for someone else's suffering. The first time I went out in public, an acquaintance of mine said, "I can't believe you're brave enough to show your face." Penny, she continued on to seek the right of a miscarriage of justice. And on March 9, 2005, prompted by Bernstein and Avery, the Wisconsin Department of Justice adopted a model eyewitness identification protocol. And Peg L was right there by Penny. Now think about it. You really have to look at this. Things are starting to come together. Everything sounds wonderful. Steven's civil lawsuit was focused on 1985, Sheriff Tom Kukurik and DA Dennis Vogel. Both men were the last of the scheduled depositions before signing over millions to Steve Avery. Now, we doubt he'd see $36 million, but certainly about $4.5 million. And their insurance company had already stated they would not cover a negligent act. It was getting serious.
'Cause the days are gonna whisper and the months are gonna talk until the years yell out the truth. Time will tell, time will tell on you. When a train whistles far away, and when the cold wind blows, when the lightning in your eyes reveals the darkness darkness in your soul, the world will be reminded of what it already knows. 'Cause the days are gonna whisper and the months are gonna talk until the years shall last.